Hi, this is Elizabeth Montgomery, inviting you to stay tuned for Bewitched.
Tony, before the show starts, I think you need to tell folks we're on social media.
I do. We're on social media.
Well, there you go. We're now on Facebook and Instagram, and it's at Going Hollywood Pod on both of those.
So that's our handle, at Going Hollywood Pod, on both Facebook and Instagram.
And what are we posting, Tony?
And we're going to just be posting, we'll talk about the show occasionally, but mostly it's just going to be like, what's happening? Who's a birthday? Who do we want to talk about and commemorate today? Who died? Because that happens a lot. It'll be fun.
So it's at Going Hollywood Pod, and it's Facebook and Instagram. Links are in the show notes or on the website, goinghollywoodpodcast.com. You'll find them there too.
Go on, stay tuned.
Too bad you can't be in two places at once.
Well, we can't have everything. That's one thing we mortals learned to accept long ago.
Atoms split. And so can man. Be in both places, here and Japan. One for the money, two for the show. Doting husbands stay, businessman go. Who says we can't have everything?
Hello, I'm film historian Tony Maeda.
And I'm Brad Shreve, who's just a guy who likes movies.
We discuss movies and television from Hollywood's golden age. We go behind the scenes and share our opinions, too.
And of course, being the average guy, my opinions are the ones that matter.
As does your self-delusion. Welcome to Going Hollywood. Previously on Going Hollywood. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Bewitched. Happy birthday to you. Yes, happy birthday, Bewitched. 60 years. One of the few things around that's older than me. 60 years. Yesterday, September 17th, 1964, Bewitched debuted on ABC. How about that? What we're going to do today, dear listener, is we're going to kind of take the template of our Mary Tyler Moore episode and expand it. Because we've decided to do two separate episodes. On this episode today, we're going to discuss the first 5 seasons of Bewitched, a.k.a. the Dick York years. And then in part 2, next week, stay tuned for next week's episode, we will talk about the Dick Sargent episodes. So basically, the 3 seasons that Dick Sargent played Darrin.
So, Tony, I'm trying to figure out, the screen is kind of blurred, so I can't really see you all that well. Are you the old Tony or the new Tony?
Well, I'm the original Tony. Let's just put it that way. I'm the OG Tony. I'm not going to be replaced.
There can be no other Tony.
There could be no other Tony, and if I was being replaced, although I would be replaced by someone who was a few inches taller than me, I wouldn't mind that. But yeah,
But would they be as bitter?
They'd be more bitter if they were Dick Sargent.
That's what I was going to say, yes.
I don't understand that. Hey, everybody. Well, it's part 2. It's part 2 of our, what's becoming a marathon Bewitched series of episodes. But you know what? I don't care. I don't care because I'm having so much fun with this, Brad. It's fine. If nobody else likes it, I love it. So that's what I'm saying. I'm so enjoying going into this series. I have fallen in love with Elizabeth Montgomery all over again, watching episode after episode after episode of Bewitched.
And I joked around last episode that maybe we should do a Bewitched podcast, and you said, yeah, we should. I'm not ready to start another second podcast, but based on the feedback we're getting, I'm like, somebody might want to do that.
It's a great idea, right? I think we're kind of doing it, though. I mean, these are not only a 2-part episode. This is a supersized 2-part episode because we just did Last week we did the Dick York years of Bewitched, which was the first 5 seasons.
And I think that was our longest episode so far.
It was pretty damn close. It was close to Mary Tyler Moore. But now we're not having done enough. We're coming back for more. Now we're coming back for the Dick Sargent years, which were the last 3 seasons of Bewitched, with Dick Sargent replacing Dick York. And I think I said in our previous episode, the reason I wanted to do 2 episodes is because this truly feels like 2 different shows to me. If you watch the last season of Bewitched and you watch the first season of Bewitched, besides the fact that one's in color and one's in black and white, they're 2 different shows. They really, really are. Even though they're repeating episodes.
Yeah, way too much.
Way too much. You'll see an episode from the last year and you're like, when did I see that episode before in black and white with Dick York? You're right. You did. But they're 2 different shows, 2 different sets of actors. It's really mind-boggling. But the one constant, of course, is the beautiful, wonderful, luminous Elizabeth Montgomery. I think she got more beautiful as the seasons went on. She's just gorgeous.
I will agree with that. And I liked her in her the more hip outfits.
Did you love that?
I loved she looked great.
She had her Marlo Thomas hair, and she wore she started wearing boots, and she had the, as we said in the last episode, the S necklace replacing the pave heart that Bill Asher, her husband, gave her because, there was trouble in Samantha Land by 1972.
And I knew they repeated episodes, but when I was going through the list of episodes to see what jogged, because I thought I knew what I wanted to do, but I wanted to jog my brain to see if something else jumped out, and some did. I could not believe one after another at the bottom of the descriptions that said, this is a remake of, this is a remake of,
yes.
This is a remake. I mean, one after another after another. It's like, how lazy can you get?
Well, that's kind of interesting. When we talked about Rhoda, do you remember we talked about, these were talented writers. They could have come up with some kind of, I think you said that, they could have come up with some kind of situations for this married couple.
Yeah.
And you wonder, did the writers in Bewitched just get so lazy? Or was it because they thought, well, no one's watching the black and white episodes, we can redo them in color? I don't know, but there's so many repeats. They actually started repeating themselves in the 4th season. And then they just went crazy when they finally got to like season 6 and season 7. They're just repeat after repeat. But amongst those repeats, there are some very good episodes, which I think we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, and I'm of the belief that no show should last more than 5 seasons.
Mm-hmm.
That seems to be the magic number. Once they go past that, I'm going to give MASH an example. People think about MASH so, with such love in their hearts. I don't, because all I remember is how bad it got. And then I think back to the earliest episodes, and I didn't mind it when McLean Stevenson and, oh my God, I can't think of his name, who played Trapper. Anyway, I didn't mind when their characters were replaced because it didn't go bad right away. But right up after the 5th season, it became this preachy show that wasn't really funny anymore, certainly not to the old degree. I think, to me, that's one of the prime examples. But when I look at shows after shows after shows, most don't seem to be able to keep it going after 5 years. And I think Bewitched would have been better if it ended after 5 years.
Yeah, well, you know who else thought that, by the way?
Elizabeth Montgomery, I'm guessing.
Elizabeth Montgomery, yeah. She wanted to end after 5 years. After the 5th season, even with all the problems with Dick York aside, which we're going to go into, she wanted to end after 5 years. Elizabeth Montgomery, here's the thing. I'm going to say me. I have to make I statements here. I think of Elizabeth Montgomery as this kind of angelic Audrey Hepburn-like actress, and she wasn't. She was a ambitious, gutsy actress, and she wanted to go on to other things. She really wanted to stretch herself. Here's a woman in her prime, and she really wants to stretch herself, her acting chops. So you can't blame her for wanting to end this series after 5 years and say, you know what, I have a 5-year contract. We've done 5 years. That's enough for syndication. Let's move on to other things, Bill. But ABC, I mean, this show was it was number 11 in its 5th year. It was still ABC's biggest hit, and ABC did not want to let them go. So when the 5th season came about and Elizabeth Montgomery was making noises about, I kind of want to leave, ABC came at her and Bill Asher, her husband, producer, and said, not only will we give you a huge salary increase, we're going to give you a piece of the show, ownership of the show. I think they gave them 25%, and complete creative control. Now, how are you going to pass that up? I mean, come on. you've got a show and you're calling the shots. So they signed a contract that would actually extend Bewitched to season 10. They were going to double it.
Yeah.
Which is pretty astounding. So, I mean, you really can't blame Elizabeth Montgomery. She's getting a huge chunk of money. Now she's a part owner of the show. And if you notice, the beginning of the 6th season is when it begins. She gets her name above the title of it goes Elizabeth Montgomery in Bewitched. And that's why, because she now owned a piece of it. She owned a chunk of it. So good for her.
Absolutely.
And I do like some of the episodes, the 6th, 7th, and 8th, some episodes in those seasons. And we're gonna talk about them now. But do you think we should go into first what exactly happened in the 5th season of Bewitched, besides what we just talked about? What happened with Dick York?
I think that's a good idea. I think a lot of people have no idea.
Right. They just, one day they're watching an episode of Bewitched and it's Dick York, and then the next week it's Dick Sargent. It's a completely different person, which is pretty much how audiences has experienced it too. There was no announcement made that, oh, we have a new Darrin.
Yeah.
This was all part of their plan, because what happened was this, and we got to go back in time a little bit. So I'm going to put on my historian cap right now, so everybody bear with me.
No, that's what we're here for.
That's what we're here. We're going to go back in time a little bit to 1959. When Dick York was doing a movie called They Came to Cordura with Gary Cooper and Rita Hayworth. So while he was making this film, he suffered an accident which severely injured his back. And it was a pretty bad accident, but he didn't stop working. What did he do? He began taking painkillers. Now, we all know now in 2024 what a slippery slope that is. He began taking painkillers in order to deal with the acute and constant pain he was having because of this accident. So he continued to work. But here's the thing. It was a degenerative condition. It just got worse. It wasn't going to get better. It was such a severe injury. And as the years went on, not only did his pain increase, but his addiction to the painkillers increased. So by the time he got to, I would say, the 3rd season of Bewitched is when we really first start seeing Darrin is suddenly not, he's away on a business trip. He's not in the episode at all. So he started missing episodes in the 3rd season because of the pain. And then in the 4th season, it increased. And then finally in the 5th season, he missed 8 episodes. He was in 22 out of 30 episodes in the 5th season. In Sandra Gould, who I kind of disparaged a lot.
Yes, you did.
In our last episode about Gladys Kravitz. I'm not disparaging the woman. I just don't appreciate her interpretation of Gladys Kravitz as opposed to the brilliant Alice Pierce. Sandra Gould said that she just remembered him being in constant pain. She said there was pain in his eyes. He couldn't move because of the pain, or he was whacked out on painkillers, and it was hard for him to remember his lines and remember his motivations. So they had a real problem here with him. And here's what I think is amazing, though. Here's a guy who is either in constant pain or whacked out on painkillers, and he still gives these wonderfully funny performances. I mean, this guy's in pain, but he's so very funny, which is kind of the difference of Dick Sargent. Dick Sargent looks like he's on painkillers, in my opinion.
Yes, he does.
You know, Dick York, who is in apparently so much pain, is so funny and so witty and so dry. He's just wonderful. But when you think about Darrin, the part of Darrin, think about all the things they had Dick York go through as Darrin. I mean, he was turned into a monkey. He was shrunk. He was turned into a donkey. I mean, it was a very physical part for him.
Yeah, it's very physical.
Very physical. He had to go through a lot. And you add the physicality of the part to the long hours they were working, 12, 13 hours a day on a TV show, and you're going to have problems. So by the 5th season, they realized they were in real trouble.
And I want to point something out real quick. You have to pay attention because you probably haven't noticed before, but if you've watched that season, Darrin sits down a lot more than he used to.
Oh, yeah, he does. He does. And you can kind of see it in his face.
Yeah.
You know, you can kind of see the wear and tear. I know he was almost 40 years old, but, you know, that doesn't mean anything. I mean, 40s, I'd be 40 in a minute anytime. But you can tell you can just see it in his face in some shots that he's not doing real well. So this all finally came to a head during the filming of the episode called Daddy Does His Thing in February of 1969. And according to Dick York, and this is what Dick York said. He said, quote, I'm going to do a quote here, Brad. I don't usually do this, but I'm going to do one right now because this is really important.
Oh.
I was too sick to go on. I had a temperature of 105. I was full of strong antibiotics for almost 10 days. I went to work that day, but I was sick. I lay in my dressing room after being in makeup, waiting to be called on the set. They knew I was feeling pretty rotten, and they tried to give me time to rest. Then I was sitting on a scaffolding with Maurice Evans, being lit. There was a flickering light that made me feel weird. And I'm sitting on this platform up in the air, and I turned to one of the grips, a friend of mine, and I said, Gibby, it was his name, I have to get down. And that's the last thing he remembered. Basically, he said he woke up on the floor. So what happened was he actually had a seizure, and he was rushed to the hospital. And director William Asher came to visit him in the hospital. Mm-hmm. And he said point blank to Dick York, do you want to quit? Because this was causing real problems. They had to rewrite and refigure episodes that he suddenly couldn't appear in to make it like Darrin. Darrin was always going on a business trip, or he would be in the very beginning of the episode, or he'd be in the very end of the episode, or they would use previous seasons' beginnings and kind of refigure them. And suddenly Elizabeth Montgomery's hair gets much longer when the episode starts. You can kind of notice that.
They had a lot of episodes where Darrin left for work and the real story began.
Exactly.
Or the story happened and Darrin came home for work.
Yes.
Darrin wasn't involved in the magic.
Exactly. Not at all. Like, there's one episode where they're in bed sleeping and Endora comes in that little bubble, which was actually from a third season episode, but they redid it for the fifth season. And then Elizabeth Montgomery comes down the stairs and suddenly her hair is now shoulder length as opposed to up above her. Nobody paid attention to the continuity in this. So anyway, he said, do you want to quit? And according to Dick York, it was the most difficult decision he ever made, but he realized that he couldn't do this anymore. He had to leave the show. So it was a very difficult decision for him to make. But he did quit the show to try to recover his health. But they were faced with a real dilemma on Bewitched. How are they going to handle this? Okay, this is a romantic comedy. Okay, this show is about the love story between Samantha and Darrin. What do you do when you don't have a Darrin anymore? Do you kill him off? Divorce was 69, so divorce was on television. But you couldn't divorce Darrin and Samantha. That's the whole premise of the show. So what are you going to do? They did nothing, pretty much. That's what they decided. We're just going to do nothing. We're just going to pretend like this never happened, and we're going to get a different actor. And one week it's Dick York. And next week it's Dick Sargent. And as I said before, this is pretty much how the audience experienced Bewitched. And this huge change.
No one will notice.
No one will notice that he's 4 inches taller than Dick York and that he's got a totally different demeanor. So yeah.
And you know what? I just had an epiphany.
What's that?
Well, one thing they could have done is give Samantha a job.
Oh, they could have done a lot of things.
It could have been from her work.
Well, could have. Well, but with that, how would that? So there wouldn't be a Darrin anymore.
No, it would. Darrin would be at home.
Oh, okay, but
I'm not saying it was a good option. I'm just saying it was an option they had.
We never see him. Is that what you're saying? Yeah, I don't. That's not much of an.
Maybe they could get Dick York to pop in his head to say hello, and then that was it.
Somebody said, "Well, she was a witch. Why didn't she just change his appearance?" I don't like this anymore. There's an episode in the first year where where Endora and Samantha are kind of playing with his face and changing his face and changing his hair. She just could have gone, "I'm tired of the way you look." Oh, now you look like Dick Sargent. So anyway, when they decided they were going to replace Darrin, that was really the only option to do. And, let's be realistic here. This happens all the time on soap operas. How many different Tad Martins were there on All My... Well, I think there was only one Tad Martin on All My Children. But you know what I'm saying. I was an All My Children freak. You do that all the time on soap operas. Soap operas were always replacing actors. So this is the same thing. So they thought, okay, who are we going to get to be the new Darrin? Well, as luck would have it, their second choice for Darrin way back in 1963 when they were casting the show was suddenly available. And his name was Dick Sargent.
Now, wasn't he the first option?
Well, no, Richard Crenna was the first option, and Richard
right.
Crenna said no. He had a movie career he was trying to do, so they went with Dick Sargent, and so they brought Dick Sargent back, and they began the show as if nothing ever happened. But here's something that's really funny. There was the first episode that Dick Sargent actually filmed in March of 1969 was Samantha's Better Halves. And the premise of the episode is actually a remake of the second season episode Divided He Falls. And in Samantha's Better Halves, Endora puts a spell on Darrin that splits him into two Darrins, the fun Darrin and the work Darrin. Mm-hmm. After they filmed it, they thought, two Darrins, that's a little bit too on the nose for what we've just gone through. So they very wisely held that episode back for later in the season and made it like a flashback. So the first episode to air with Dick Sargent was actually was called Samantha and the Beanstalk. So
that's one of the 5 million appearances that Johnny Whitaker made during the 60s.
Yeah, it's a fun episode. It's a cute episode. But you know, the thing about Dick Sargent is, and for people who, you know, you have your Dick York camp and your Dick Sargent camp. I think you have a Dick Sargent camp. I don't know, because I'm clearly in the Dick York camp. I think Dick York was just perfection as Darrin. But I'm not upset that I didn't necessarily want them to end the show either. I think that I kind of like the fact the show went on. Maybe I'm not crazy about Dick Sargent. I don't think that he and Elizabeth Montgomery have a great romantic chemistry like Dick York and Elizabeth Montgomery had. But here's the funny thing is that Elizabeth Montgomery was much closer to Dick Sargent than she was to Dick York. She liked Dick York a lot. She appreciated their chemistry. But, you know, here's a guy who's been kind of putting her through the ringer for the past 3 years with his illnesses. So it makes sense that she's like, I can breathe again. We have somebody dependable. We can move forward.
It's not all on me.
Exactly. So, you know, you get some, you give some. You know, you take some, you give some. Got to take the rough with the smooth. So,
as far as the Dick Sargent camp, I used to be on it. Obviously, this was early sign that I was gay as a kid because I thought he was more handsome.
Did you really?
Oh yeah. I still find him more handsome than Dick York.
I guess he's traditionally more handsome. I think there's something adorable about Dick York, though. I just think there's something adorable.
I can see that, but not my cup of tea. But that's okay.
Yeah.
I certainly wasn't ugly. I'm not implying that in any way. But I found him more attractive, and there are aspects of him that I did like. There were. I wish I could put my finger on it. I can't say exactly what they were, but there are some negatives that we can get into later. That especially looking back on it, I see now.
Yeah. Well, he was a much less reactive Darrin. He was a much calmer Darrin.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Dick York would get so worked up about things, and Dick Sargent didn't.
But if you think about it, in their 6th year of marriage, wouldn't he at that point have kind of gotten used to it? I think it
actually, Elizabeth Montgomery said that. She said they've been married for 5 years now, so their marriage is a little calmer. Mm-hmm. A little more sexless, maybe. And if we know anything about Dick Sargent, we can understand that. And she did feel personally closer to Dick Sargent. But who, and you kind of hinted at this in the last episode, who did not feel personally closer to Dick Sargent?
Agnes Moorehead.
That's right. Aggie was not happy. Now, there could be many reasons why Agnes Moorehead was not happy with this change. First of all, she was very close to Dick York. They were very close. Mm-hmm. She loved Dick York, which is kind of funny when you watch the shows, you know, because there's always at each other. But she pretty much adored Dick York. She felt that much of the success of the show was because, and she was right in this, much of the success of the show was because of the chemistry between Elizabeth Montgomery and Dick York. So she was very disappointed, upset that they chose to go this route. She probably would have preferred they end the show because, you know, she never wanted to do it to begin with. You know, she was never really crazy about doing it, even though she was with the show in her contract, we didn't talk about this last time, she only had to appear in 8 out of 10 episodes of Bewitched. So she's not in every episode because she was off doing movies. She was off doing Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte and getting an Academy Award nomination, or doing, you know, whatever, doing The Singing Nun with Debbie Reynolds, with her pal Debbie Reynolds. And she did not hide her feelings about Dick Sargent. She really, really gave Dick Sargent a hard time. especially during the first year. So much so that it kind of came to a head when they were doing the Salem episodes, which is the 7th year. He put up with this for a year, and according to David White, they were on the plane coming back from Salem to Los Angeles, and Dick Sargent broke down. And he said, I just can't do this. I can't work with her anymore. I can't take this attitude from her. She's so cold to me. She's so mean to me. I can't do this anymore. So it fell upon Elizabeth Montgomery to have the talk with Agnes Moorehead. So apparently, Elizabeth Montgomery went into Agnes Moorehead's trailer once they were back on the lot and had the talk with her and said, Aggie, cut it out. He ain't going anywhere. He's been here over a year now. So you need to get over it and get on with it.
Good for her.
And good for her. Well, she was a producer now.
Yeah.
This was her show. She had to lay it down for Agnes Moorehead. And according to Elizabeth Montgomery, Moorehead later apologized to her on the set, but never to Dick Sargent. But the atmosphere definitely calmed down.
Boy, that's bitter. I got to go back to Debbie Reynolds' thing here.
Okay.
Knowing Agnes Moorehead is...
We always have a Debbie Reynolds connection on these podcasts.
We do. Everything we do.
Everything's Debbie.
How gay can you get?
Nothing's wrong with that. I love Debbie.
The fact that Agnes Moorehead is kind of what we would call today evangelical, or at least very close, and she carried her Bible with her.
Yeah.
It's such an oddity to me that she was friends with Debbie Reynolds, who was...
Do you know Debbie Reynolds was very spiritual, too? Debbie
But
Reynolds
was
came
she
from
in the same way? Because she kind of had a crazy life, too, though.
Well, I don't think she was... Her parents didn't want her to do... They were questioning movies. When she was a teenager and she got the contract at Warner Brothers, her parents were like, what is this you're going to do? Because they were very Christian. She had a very strong spiritual background, Debbie Reynolds, up until when she died. And people we're totally going off on a Debbie Reynolds tangent once again. But Todd Fisher said that he feels that his mother kind of willed herself to die after Carrie died because of her strong faith. She could do that. So she had a very strong faith, Debbie Reynolds did. She just didn't wear it on her sleeve. She didn't come to the set with a Bible in one hand and her script in the other like Agnes Moorehead did. Yeah. But it kind of makes sense when you know anything about Debbie Reynolds' background. She was very, very strong in her spiritual beliefs. She just didn't put them in your face, that's all.
Now, we haven't got into Dick Sargent's sexuality, and I don't know if you want to go there yet, but I'm just curious, did that have something to do with Agnes Moorehead's attitude?
Yeah, I know. I thought
was he out?
After you said that he was not. People, open secrets. Was Paul Lynde out? Come on. How can you be in when you're Paul Lynde? Dick Sargent was not out professionally. Let's just put it that way. You couldn't be at this time in Hollywood and expect to work. That's just the unfortunate truth. Well,
actually, I've got to bring up, we touched on Idris Magini the last episode. Hayden Rourke, who played Dr. Bellows.
Yeah.
He would have parties after shots he would wear a smoking jacket. He was a very traditional, stereotypical old gay with his smoking jacket, and his husband or his partner at the time would be there. And the whole cast would be there. Even their kids, either Barbara Edens or
Larry Hagman.
Larry Hagman. Everybody knew that he was gay. It was very out.
Well, that's
very out to that time.
Well, I'm not saying that's privately. I'm talking about publicly.
Right. Not publicly. You
not
correct.
Publicly. You could, people were stupid in Hollywood. People knew who was gay and who wasn't gay.
Yes.
You don't think people knew Paul Lynde was gay? But publicly, no. He did not come out publicly until 1991 on National Coming Out Day, which was pretty remarkable. I think even in 91 it was difficult. Even in 91 it was difficult. So I think he lived the life, and people who were close to him knew, but it wasn't out in the public. It wasn't public knowledge. No.
Tony, you and I get excited when we get messages and emails and texts from listeners that tell us how much they enjoy the show.
We do.
But I think we should push it a little bit and ask them to go a little bit further.
Ooh, a challenge.
If you enjoy this show, let others know. 5 stars are great, whatever you want to give, except 1 star. If you have 1 star, say, that show's not for me and move on. We accept that.
Yeah, you don't give us 1 star. Just say, no, not for me. Just skip it. Or tell your friends. That's the best way too, right? Tell your friends, hey, I have this great fun podcast with these 2 kooky guys who talk about movies and TV. We run the gamut We have everything.
Yeah, we're all over the place.
We're all over the place is a better way to put it.
But in a good way. So do it right now before you forget.
Before we start talking about the episodes, I do want to, you did bring up the genie in the bottle. We need to talk a little bit about I Dream of Jeannie, because, you know, it's gone to legend right now, because you have a series which is also Screen Gems, in which Barbara Eden is playing a magical creature with a master. I'm not going to get into any of the political connotations about that. I'm just talking about the premise. You know, and it was created by a friend of Bill Asher's. Okay, Sidney Sheldon created I Dream of Jeannie for NBC. Sidney Sheldon worked with Bill Asher on the Patty Duke show. And he actually went to Bill Asher and said, "Do you mind if I do this?" And Bill Asher said, "No, go ahead." And Elizabeth Montgomery couldn't kind of believe it. She couldn't believe that not only was this show a blatant ripoff of her own series, but they were filming on the same lot. She would, you know, they were living in the same quote unquote air quotes neighborhood. You know, Jeannie's house was right down the street from the Stevens house.
Yep.
The Bellows living room was at times Samantha and Darren's living room. It was the same.
And wasn't the Kravitz house the outdoors of the Bellows house? I'm almost certain of that.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, yes, of course. I mean, it was Screen Gems. They shared the same lot. They shared the same makeup room. And Sally Field told a very funny story on Rosie O'Donnell in 2000 about this, because she said, because she was the flying nun at that time. And she was also on the Columbia lot. And in the morning, she said they would all get together for their makeup call. And she said it would be Barbara Eden, and then Elizabeth Montgomery, and then Sally Field, and then maybe Shirley Jones, Partridge Family, and then who else was there? And she said that Barbara Eden was working on her nightclub act, and she was singing all the time. Now, this is 6 a.m, okay? And Barbara Eden is singing right next to you. And she said that one time she was singing, she got up and left, and Elizabeth Montgomery turned to Sally Field and said, "I wish she would stop fucking singing." Maybe she didn't say fucking, but in my mind, she did. Anyway, she was not pleased. So publicly, Elizabeth Montgomery was very magnanimous about I Dream of Jeannie and was like, "No, it's a different show, blah, you know. Yeah, they have an evil twin with dark hair, you know, okay. Kind of like we have with Serena. But no, but privately, she couldn't understand why her husband gave his blessing to this show. It kind of wore at her, it irritated her, is a good way of saying it.
But am I correct? Despite her comment about Barbara Eden, my understanding is even though she resented the show, she didn't resent the actors who basically were just doing their job. They were just doing their job. She did not blame anything on Larry Hagman or Bill Daly or Barbara Eden, even though Barbara Eden's singing annoyed her. She did not. She was irritated with Sidney Sheldon, and she was irritated with her husband for giving the go-ahead. So I don't know if that's the seeds of the dissolution of this marriage, but you know, you got to wonder why was he so okay with, yeah, go ahead, do a show ours. But it's important to point out too, Jeannie was never a direct competition to Bewitched. Jeannie was never I don't think Jeannie was ever in the top 25. And Jeannie never reached Bewitched's heights. There's a sentence. Right. But it was still an irritant to Elizabeth Montgomery. She was not crazy about it. What are your feelings about I Dream of Jeannie?
I like I Dream of Jeannie. Like Bewitched, I find the black and white episodes of the very first season of I Dream of Jeannie is in black and white. Unless it's colorized, it's in black and white. I like those. I find them kind of cool. Like Bewitched, there's something, I don't know what the word is. It's not spooky, but there's just something really fantastical about the first season. That's the word. It lends itself more to the fantasy. When it's in color, and I'm talking about Jeannie here, not Bewitched, it's just a silly sitcom. But in black and white, it's kind of cool. It's got kind of a really cool, fantastical quality, which I like.
And a sexiness.
It does have a sexiness
to it.
No, I like it. And Larry Hagman's beautiful in those early seasons. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So is Barbara Eden, by the way.
Yes, she is. And I got to tell you, like most gay men I know, I sure as hell wanted to live in that sexy genie bottle.
Oh, well.
With all those pillows and it was extravagant.
How many gay men have my friend Steven. Hey, Steven, if you're listening, he has replicas of that bottle. I mean, it's a cool.
I almost designed a website
cool
for the guy that one of the guys that sells those bottles, which are extremely expensive.
Oh, sure.
But we had a creative disagreement, so I said no, we can't do this. Anyway,
oh yes, what do you think of I Dream of Jeannie, Brad?
I like both of them equally for different reasons. I will say, even though I think Bewitched is probably a little bit better, I do think I Dream of Jeannie did a couple things better than Bewitched.
Oh.
First of all, the fact that Jeannie and Tony were single added a little bit more of the sexiness to it.
Mm-hmm.
If the show was remade today, she probably would have to call him Master once or twice because obviously that is what he was. But I think they would just change her to calling him Tony all the time because obviously that would not go over well to call him Master.
In 2024, there's definite issues with the whole premise. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, exactly. But two things that I think were better in I Dream of Jeannie. One is the reason for Tony not wanting her to do magic. Darrin just didn't want, I guess he just wanted to live a normal life. He didn't want Samantha to do magic. Tony, it had made a lot more sense because he was an astronaut. That was his lifelong dream. He loved being an astronaut, and he didn't want to risk losing that career. Mm-hmm. So that made a lot of sense why he didn't want Jeannie to use her magic. Because there were times that he was a lot more welcome to it than Darrin was, if it fit the need.
Plus, she wasn't exactly a 20th century woman. I mean, she didn't speak her English wasn't that great when he first met her. Granted, she did become, when they got married, she became, Jeannie. But it's just funny. She wasn't really as presentable, shall we say, as Elizabeth Montgomery was, as Samantha was, as Jeannie wasn't.
And the other thing is, you mentioned Sheila was considered as a foible for Samantha.
Foil, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Dr. Bellows was a really good foil for Tony. Compared to Gladys, really the only foil they had was Gladys Kravitz. And if you compare the two, there's no comparison.
Yeah. I can see that. I can see that. Well, Larry Tate was kind of the Dr. Bellows part of it. Not really, though. I don't think so.
Dr. Bellows was intelligent. He was scheming. He always failed. So those are two things I think they did better.
I love Barbara Eden. God bless her. She's still beautiful.
Yeah, she really is.
But I mean, I think to me, there's nothing like Elizabeth Montgomery. So before we go into the episodes, now we're going to, listener, as we said in the last episode, we are going to discuss 4 episodes from the Dick Sargent era. Before we do that, though, I had a question for you, Brad. In 1965, what beach party movie did Elizabeth Montgomery make a cameo in as Samantha, and who played her father? Do you know this?
Beach party? Well, I'm going to guess it wasn't Maurice Evans that played her father.
No, it was not Maurice Evans.
That just rubs me wrong that it wasn't Maurice Evans.
Right.
Oh, well, the only beach party that can come to my head, and I'm certain it's not the one, is Beach Blanket Bingo.
It wasn't.
I can't think of.
That's kind. Well, that's kind of.
Sure, others. I can't think of the names. Go for it.
It's a hard one because I probably, had I not done the research. Hello, film TV historian. I probably wouldn't know off the top of my head either. I know she did one. It was How to Stuff a Wild Bikini from 1965, and her father was played by Buster Keaton.
Oh my word.
Buster Keaton played her father. And the reason she did it was because obviously it was directed by Bill Asher. So it's really funny, a really cute little scene in the movie where she just pops in and then pops out again. But it's Elizabeth Montgomery. You don't know it until the camera turns around, but it's clearly her wearing her little heart necklace. So she was still very much in love with her husband when she did that.
And I want to ease your fears.
Yeah.
I think as a film historian, people will forgive you for not knowing all the beach movies.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Whew, takes a little bit of load off me. Oh, wow. I don't have to know all the Beach Blanket Bingo Babylons stuff in a wild freaking bikini. Okay, so we're going to start with, oddly, you and I, when we picked these episodes, you and I both ignored the 6th season completely. Dick Sargent's first season. Completely. And there's some good stuff in this. Adam is born. Their son is born. Mm-hmm. Elizabeth Montgomery was pregnant yet again with her 3rd child. At the beginning of the 6th season, so Samantha became pregnant, and Adam was born. But we're like, forget about it. we're not gonna talk about that. So I think you're up first with your first episode of the Dick Sargent era.
Yes, and this is an episode that I probably remembered. I was going to say I remembered most as a kid. I don't know if I remember most, but I remember really loving the Salem period.
So did I. I was obsessed with the Salem era, with the Salem episodes.
It's really weird because as a rule, I don't like it when a cast leaves and goes somewhere else.
Right.
But these really worked for whatever reason.
Yeah, no, they did.
I think because they were able to go to fun places.
They were, and it was unusual. It was perfect that they go to Salem because of the witches.
Yeah.
Hello. And it was really cool that they did it. And you know why they did it? You know the real reason? Here's a little backstory for you. You know the real reason why the Salem episodes were made?
I know it has to do with the fire, but I don't know the details.
That's right. There was a fire at Columbia Studios, and over half the sets were burned during their hiatus, and they were getting ready to film a new season. And they were like, oh, shit. We don't have a set. What are we going to do? So they thought, well, we'll take them away. We'll take them out of Morning Glory Circle so we have time to rebuild these sets. And they decided to take them to Salem, which makes so much sense. So thankfully they began their production. You know, most TV shows begin production way, way in the late spring for a fall premiere back in the day. So they were able to film these Salem episodes on location in Salem. They did go to Salem. Obviously, they were also in the back lot because you can see mountains in the back. I'm like, why are there mountains in Salem?
I noticed that myself.
You know, like, oh, there's a mountain range in Massachusetts. Okay. It's not the Berkshires. So
it wasn't even a green mountain. It was a traditional California brown mountain.
It's kind of crazy how they do that. And that allowed them enough time to rebuild the set. So then they went back and the episodes building up to them going to Salem, they were able to film afterwards and then insert them into the Salem episodes. So that's why the Salem saga was made.
I'm going to go off on a tangent here. One of my favorite episodes of The X-Files, and it has nothing to do with the story. They went to Lake Okeechobee, which I'm familiar with. It's in the middle of Iowa, and it is a lake surrounded by vacation homes. And in The X-Files, they went to Lake Okeechobee, Iowa, which was a pristine lake filled with trees and mountains in the background because, you know, they filmed in Vancouver. So anyway, that has nothing to do with Bewitched, but you reminded me of that, and I laugh every time I see that episode. So anyway.
I think one of the cool things about this, then they, you know, basically they had a redecorated house, which ones you either think, okay, Darren's either doing really well at McMahon and Tate, or Samantha said, honey, sweetheart, I'm a little tired of this house. Can I just twitch us a new house? Because it's completely remodeled. They have shag carpeting. They have new furniture, very 70s, you know, early American furniture. There's new rooms upstairs. Suddenly there's doorways. And my thing, I think I said before during our Alice Adams podcast, I do have a thing about back stairways. I think they're so cool. And now they have a back stairway. It doesn't go anywhere. I mean, people go up those stairs and you're like, where are they going? Because there's a wall where the stairway would end, but it's cool. I love the fact that they have a back stairway now. And that set, as we said, the original set was used in I Dream of Jeannie. It was used in movies. I think it was in a Jerry Lewis movie called Hook, Line, and Sinker.
Yep.
So, I mean, the set had been used. And I really like the new set. I think it refreshes the show, the new set.
The movie Brian's Song.
Yes.
That movie was really popular in the 70s. It's kind of a tearjerker. Not only did they use the Bewitched house, the interior set, they didn't change anything.
No, it's so funny, isn't it? It's like, do they think people aren't aware? It's like if suddenly a show was on the Mary Tyler Moore set. And you'd be like, wait a minute, that's Mary's M. What the hell? Who's in? What? How does that work? Yeah. They don't think people noticed? It's so crazy. It's so crazy.
Especially such an iconic set.
I know, exactly.
I do want to bring one more thing in before I go into this episode, because you brought up Morning Glory Circle. And one of the things that really got to me is, you know, they're kind of vague about where the Stevens live, but I guess it's hinted or maybe even said at some point that it's in Connecticut.
Or New York. It can be anywhere.
But it's not in the city.
No, it's a suburb.
Yet they drive into the city and back out at such record speed.
Very quickly.
Oh, we're going to go in for lunch. And then, you know, right after lunch, within an hour, they're back home.
Very quickly.
They're just always darting back and forth.
It's a very close suburb.
Yeah, it's a very close suburb.
It ain't in Queens, I'll tell you that. It ain't in Queens. But yeah, various times it's like near New Rochelle, and it's in Connecticut. You're never really sure where Morning Glory Circle is. So Brad's first episode takes place in Salem, which I love. I love that you chose this, Brad. It's episode number 3 of the 7th season, episode 203 in the series, and it's called The Salem Saga, Part 1. It's directed by William Asher and written by Ed Jurist, and it's from October 8th, 1970. Brad, take us into The Salem Saga.
And am I correct? This is the first of the 8 episodes in Salem. Am I correct?
It's correct. They went back and filmed later in the season. Once the set was built, they went back and filmed the build up to why they went to Salem, why they were going to Salem. They're going to Salem for a witches' convention. The Queen of the Witches, Hepzibah, comes and stays with Samantha and Darrin because Samantha wants to go to Salem. She doesn't want to go to Salem. She has to go to Salem to this witches' convention. So the 2 episodes before this are basically back in Morning Glory Circle and the build up to everybody going to Salem for the witches' convention.
And it's a perfect place to have the witches' convention in Salem.
It's perfect.
To say about Hepzibah being the Queen of the Witches, this is one thing that was really odd. I don't remember what season it was, but Samantha was crowned Queen of the Witches.
She was.
And then that whole storyline just vanished.
Just went away.
Boom.
She said she'd only do it for a year. So I guess it was the 4th season. And she said she'd only do it for a year. So I guess that year ended. And she's not Queen of the Witches anymore. Hepzibah came back.
So the way the story begins is Sam and Darrin are in the living room with Endora and Tabitha, and maybe Adam's there. And Endora is going to watch Tabitha and Adam until Esmeralda shows up. So Sam and Darrin get on the plane, and the plane, I guess it's the era they were trying to show that they did fly somewhere, or they were using it as filler. I don't know why, but they really stayed in the cockpit showing the runway and then showing the runway when they landed for very long times. I mean, not huge, but longer than was really necessary, and wasn't even necessary at all. But anyway.
Well, what, an hour flight from New York to Boston, and it's like this huge airliner, like they're going to Europe.
So, of course, as Sam and Darrin are flying to Massachusetts, Endora, apparently Esmeralda showed up because Endora shows up on the wing.
Yes, so funny.
Laughing, enjoying the wind in her hair. Now, one thing I will say is better. There was...
Right.
I think the first episode I ever saw where Endora and Sam were on a plane, there was barely any wind in their hair. So at least this time they really had the fan blowing on Endora. And it's so funny.
Yes, that's the first season.
Because
yes.
In this episode, Sam and Darrin see Endora and freak out, but also a passenger and one of the flight attendants. And it's so funny because I think the passenger passes out. I'm not really sure.
Yes.
The flight attendant keeps trying to tell another flight attendant that Endora is out there, and the other flight attendant says she's crazy. And then when Samantha pops out there, she goes, "Oh my God, there's 2 women on the wing." And of course they vanish before the second flight attendant looks.
And it's like that episode of Twilight Zone, right?
Yes, exactly. Except this one wasn't trying.
Is it William Shatner?
Yes.
Who sees the guy on the...
Except Endora wasn't trying to tear the wing apart. She wasn't that evil.
Yeah, she wasn't. But I do love in that episode, the first you just talked about from the first season, Witcher Wife, when the first time we see Samantha and Endora on a airplane wing, and then Samantha goes in the cockpit, and Endora's last line is, "It's the only way to fly."
Yes, yes.
I love it.
So they land in Salem, and this is obviously a studio set, but it still looks pretty good at the beginning when they first land and they get to the hotel. And Endora is riding on the back of the convertible, sitting, with the wind blowing her hair. It really has nothing to do with the story other than it's funny, and it was driving Darrin crazy that she was doing that. What I love is when they get into Salem, Dick Wilson, who has regularly been on this show, I think he was on 18 episodes of Bewitched as the drunk guy. He was either...
It's amazing.
They bump into him on the sidewalk in New York, or Darrin. He was frequently sitting next to Darrin after, I guess, Dave vanished.
Yeah.
Darrin's drinking buddy.
He's always in the bar. He's in
bar.
jail with Darrin.
Well,
he's a recurring character.
Yes.
Drunk. Recurring, yeah.
As they're getting up to the hotel in Salem, guess who is walking down the street? Dick Wilson.
He made it to Salem.
Who many people know as Mr. Whipple. That drunk took quite the walk from New York City.
He did.
Oh, in addition to those 18 episodes, he did show up at least once. I don't know if we're going to get into this, the bad spinoff. I don't know. I don't think we want to. But Tabitha, there was a Tabitha spinoff that was pretty poor. He showed up on that episode as well. Mm-hmm. Well, they get there, and there's a sign of an ugly witch And Endora and Samantha are immediately disgusted by this. And so Endora turns the ugly witch on the sign to a pretty witch. Looks like Samantha, actually.
Looks like Samantha, exactly.
And the drunk guy sees that and figures out they're witches right away. Of course, nobody believes him. Now, as Tony said, one of the things I really enjoyed about Salem that I didn't realize is the Hollywood Hills were in the background. And not just a touch. You know, like if you watch old episodes of Gilligan's Island and the Brady Bunch, Brady Bunch makes sense. But you can see touches of the Hollywood Hills here and there. They didn't even try to cover these up. They didn't blatant.
Yeah, they didn't try at all. They didn't try at all. Yeah, they didn't. Which is odd because they were in Salem. I guess it was just too difficult for them to get, live shots. They do a lot of process shots of Salem, but like the House of Seven Gables, which they go to, they actually filmed them at the House of Seven Gables, but it's not a long scene. You know what I mean? It's just them getting in their car.
That was my guess because this was in front of the hotel that they're staying. I figured because they knew they were going to do a lot more shots there. That's probably why they used the studio set.
Yeah. It's easier too. More control.
Much easier for them.
Yeah.
So Darrin and Samantha decide to take a tour of the House of Seven Gables, and this show just made me want to go to Salem so bad. And I'm mad when I was up in Massachusetts. I never went there. I'm going to have to go someday.
It's a very cool city.
But I really love this house.
Yeah.
The exterior and the interior, I'm hoping the interior was the same, which just grabbed me. But anyway, as they're touring the house, they're warned by the tour guide not to touch anything because it's all antique things. Well, as she's sitting there doing a discussion or a speech about the room they were in, this bed warmer starts batting Samantha in the ass. She keeps looking around like she doesn't know what's hitting her. She keeps looking around, doesn't know what it is. Well, finally she sees it's the bedpan acting on its own.
Bed warmer. That's a big distinction that Samantha makes. Yes. It's a bed warmer, not a bedpan. Yes.
When I told you I was going to do this episode, I kept saying bedpan. Yeah. And then I realized later, no, I meant bed warmer. And I was really happy later when Darrin said bedpan.
Yeah, exactly.
And Samantha corrected him. So it's not just me.
Yeah.
So it's a bed warmer, which you put between the sheets to warm the bed before they went to bed. So this bed warmer keeps batting on Samantha. She finally turns around and realizes this thing has a conscience. It's moving on its own.
Yeah.
And she keeps catching it as it's starting to float in front of everybody. And the tour guide is yelling at her not to touch anything. And the first time I don't get it because Samantha said it was about to fall off the wall. And the tour guide was very nasty.
Yeah.
I think she should have said, well, thank you. But then it keeps happening. And at one point, the tour goes into the next room. And Samantha is still in the room where the bed warmer was. And it blocks the door. And she tries to go under it. It slides down. And she tries to go over it. It slides up. And going up, down, up, down, up, down. And, Darrin turns around and gets mad at her for playing around, which you would think Darrin would know that's not what she would do. But anyway, it doesn't matter.
Right.
It's still fun. It's very funny to watch this thing going up and down. Well, the woman gets mad again and tells him one more time and you're going to get tossed out. So the tour ends, and of course the woman gives them she's smiling and saying goodbye to everybody, gives them a very nasty look. Samantha and Darrin get into their convertible, and the bed warmer is in the back seat. And the woman realizes that the bed warmer is missing because one of the other tour guides tells her, and she immediately knows, I know who stole it.
Yeah.
So she contacts the police. Well, the drunk guy, Dick Wilson, sees them come back to the hotel, and the bed warmer is banging on Darrin. It doesn't like Darrin. Apparently no witch likes Darrin.
No.
Occasionally Uncle Arthur likes him. So Darrin has to wrestle with this bed warmer. Samantha picks it up easily by the handle and takes it up to the room. Eventually the police show up and they bang on the door, and Samantha and Darrin say they have no idea why. They don't even know where the bedpan is. They don't know. It wasn't them that stole it. And of course the bedpan comes out on its own. Darrin has to admit that he stole it, and he is sent to jail. And that is the end of that first episode. I'm going to do just a really quick one because I didn't want to get too in-depth into the second one.
Let's just do a recap of what happens in the second one.
I do think it's funny that it is mentioned in that episode that Endora says that Samantha brings up a thing that Endora had a fling with Sir Walter Raleigh. And she warns Endora that she will tell Daddy about this fling with Sir Walter Raleigh. And one thing I love that we haven't touched on is Endora and Maurice. seemed to me like they were the first open marriage on television.
Yeah, they were. Yeah. You're absolutely. I think you're right about that.
You know, they're married. They don't like each other, but they love each other. But they're always on dates with other people.
Well, I think when you live, what's a witch's lifespan? 1,000 years or more. I think you're probably going to have an open marriage.
Well, yeah.
I mean, what the hell is going to happen when Darrin, gets to be? I mean, there's episodes about this when Darrin gets to be an old man and Samantha still looks like she's 37. I mean, it's just, yeah. So I think they've gone their separate ways. There's still a lot of, there's still emotion involved between the two, but they've gone their separate ways. And they're probably television's first open marriage. I think so.
It's funny that they got away with it. And it's only because they were witches. But
yes,
I don't think anybody really caught it that well. So,
Nobody did. Yeah. There's a whole different set of rules for the witches. Now, the bed warmer in part 2 turns out to be a warlock, correct? That is trapped in the bed warmer?
Yes, he was trapped in the bed warmer by Serena.
Of course.
And
enter Serena.
Well, first of all, this is where you really, they went back to Endora being this extremely powerful witch because Samantha wants to find out who turned this bed warmer who turned this man into a bed warmer because as we know, not in every episode, one witch cannot undo a spell of another witch.
Right.
So Endora at the Witches' Council, which is always that clouded pink sky place that you really don't know where that is.
Not much of a convention.
It's a mystical land.
It's not much of a convention either. There's maybe a dozen witches hanging out. I'm like,
that was weird to me too. There were, as many witches as have come and gone. You would have thought there was a lot more. Maybe it was just
nothing like the recent DNC convention.
maybe they bought a higher ticket for the pre-party.
Maybe that's what it was. Yeah. This was just there was a lull. Yeah.
So Samantha goes to Endora, who is running the show there. And she begs her to find out who it is. So Endora, with the clouds and the lightning bolts and the thing that we used to see in the past, does this huge incantation, very powerful incantation, to find out who it is. And it takes a while, but eventually we find out it was Serena. Serena goes back to Old Salem. It finds out she and this guy were having a fling, and somebody came to Serena's door who I think she was having a fling with as well. So she quickly turned the man into a bedpan, and she never changed him back. And that was really so. In the end, the bedpan is gone because the man has been turned. The bedpan was turned back into a man, and it comes up in the trial with the judge that the officers are saying that the bedpan was alive and moving on its own. So the judge is pretty much, we're done here, and tosses everything out. So that's how it ends.
I'm glad you brought up Serena because I don't think I'm doing any spoiler alerts here. In case I am, here's the spoiler alert. Elizabeth Montgomery plays Serena.
No, it was played by Pandora Spox.
By Pandora Spox. Well, here's the thing. Now, even though Serena made her very first appearance on Bewitched in the second season, when Tabitha was born, she wasn't credited as Pandora Spox until the 6th season.
Interesting.
That's when isn't that funny? She was never credited. And Elizabeth Montgomery had the fun idea of calling her Pandora Spox because it's a play on Pandora's box. And someone said, why don't you just call her Pandora's box? And Elizabeth Montgomery's like, well, there's no elegance in that. I
never made that connection.
Pandora's box. And I actually prefer the original Serena. Serena was actually inspired because Elizabeth Montgomery was getting bored. She's an actress, and, Samantha's wonderful, but it gets boring playing a good character all the time. She wanted to play someone with a little more meat. In the first season, she had done, there was an episode where Endora changed herself into Samantha so she could have a clothing fitting, and then she meets somebody, and you can imagine what happens. So basically, who and Serena is in the very first episodes is that same character. She's very elegant. She's very haughty. She's very much like Endora, except she's Elizabeth Montgomery. And then she became kind of a hippie kook. And I prefer the older Serena, the elegant one, the one who seems a little haughtier and who's very, just above it all, as opposed to this crazy hippie kook that Serena became. But still, it's a fun character.
I never liked Serena, just like I never liked Jeannie's sister. I don't like it when they have a character play a double. It just always has bothered me. Even Green Acres went there. Really drove me nuts.
Well, but if it's going to be a double, Elizabeth Montgomery does a great job. But yeah, the characterization is annoying. And she's just the laugh, and I don't like her as the kook. I like her as the haughty, Endora-like character.
When I picture Serena, I picture her playing with Larry's hair and calling him Cotton Top.
Cotton Top. Cotton Top.
But I did like her in this episode. I was really surprised. I thought she was fun and funny.
She is.
I'm like,
she is.
Wow, I like her. That's really weird.
All right, so let's move on to my first episode for this Dick Sargent Era, and it's from season 7. It's episode 18, 218 in the series, and it's called The House That Uncle Arthur Built. It's from February 11th, 1971. It's directed by Richard Michaels and written by Bernie Kahn, and here's the reason why I chose it. It's not necessarily a funny, great episode, but it is really interesting. Because the premise of the episode is, and hold on to your phones, everybody, Uncle Arthur has a girlfriend. Yes, let me say that one more time. Uncle Arthur has a girlfriend.
Who's he kidding?
Who he's trying to impress. This pretentious new girlfriend named Aretha, who's played by the fabulous actress Barbara Rhodes. And she hates practical jokes. So
Aretha is the witch Sheila.
Kind of. Yeah, she is kind of. She's very pretentious. She's very haughty. She's dressed in this Grecian outfit. And she hates practical jokes. So Uncle Arthur basically forswears himself. Is that the right word? He basically does a spell on himself to remove the practical jokes from his being and puts them in the walls of the Stevens house. Now, that sounds pretty convoluted. It is actually funny, but that's not the thing. I mean, let's think about this for a minute, and this is why I love this episode. We talked about earlier, and I was joking about Bewitched is the gayest show on TV, but it is. Because what's happening in this episode is Arthur is suppressing an essential part of himself in order to please someone else. I mean, we're going to forget about the fact that he's in love with a woman because nobody buys that for a minute. But the larger theme that this is a person who is suppressing an integral part of their personality in order to please other people is pretty damn amazing and pretty damn forward thinking. And when he announces to Samantha, first of all, that he's in love with this girl, she's a little dubious. She's like, "Really, Uncle Arthur, girl? Really? You're in love with this woman?" So he decides to get rid of his character, an essential part of himself, in order to please her. So, I mean, how existential is that? I mean, you can't ignore the metaphor here for homosexuality, especially because it's Paul Lynde. You know what I mean? If it had been some butch character actor who wants to get rid of his, his practical jokes, okay, that's one thing. But this is Paul Lynde. So you basically have the gayest character on television trying to change to please somebody else. And of course it doesn't work because as much as he tries to suppress his practical jokes, they keep coming out. Because you can't get rid of it, folks. It's part of you. It's in you. You know what I mean? So in the end, of course, and this is also, I want to point out, this is 1971. So we're post-Stonewall here. And in the end, of course, he can't do it. The practical jokes explode from the house. There's a whole subplot with a client of Darrin's, which is just stupid, and I'm not going to go into it because it's not important. The important part about this episode is in the end, Arthur embraces his true self. Now, you have to read into that whatever you want to, but to me, it's pretty obvious and it's pretty damn amazing that this show is doing this. And Elizabeth Montgomery said, she was talking about this episode, when she was talking about The Witches Are Out, which we talked about briefly with Matt, which is basically about the suppression of a minority, that they were not, on Bewitched, they weren't ignorant of the larger messages they were sending out in the world. They weren't intentional, but they weren't unaware of what they were saying. And I just think that's a tremendous, tremendous episode. So watch this episode, not necessarily for the plot, but for the amazing balls they had to basically have this theme so close to, Stonewall, so close to the event that changed gay history.
One thing that's funny to me is Uncle Arthur wanted to put away his jokester side. It's almost like he didn't even try. He couldn't even do it for 5 minutes.
No, and isn't that amazing? I mean, how many, you grew up, I grew up, we both tried to play it straight at some point. We all gay men, I don't think so, maybe not anymore. I don't know, I'm not a kid, but at least from my generation, we all did in order to survive. We all had to pretend. We all had to be something that we were not. We all had to deny an integral part of ourselves. And it doesn't work. It does not work. Eventually, that closet door flies open and the jokes come flying out, at least for most people. I'm speaking of myself. Some people live in the closet, I'm sure. But not Uncle Arthur and not this boy, I'll tell you right now.
Yeah, that was awesome. I never made that connection.
Isn't it great? It's a great episode. I highly recommend watching it just for that. So what's your next episode, Brad?
My next episode is one that I thought was a lot of fun. It has Daddy, and I love Maurice Evans.
Maurice Evans.
So when we were looking for episodes, I'm like, I have got to find a Maurice Evans episode. And this one I really like. It's called A Plague on Maurice and Samantha. It's from season 9, episode 9, from November of 1971. So this is towards the end of the series. And Samantha contracts one of the many illnesses that over the period of this show that makes her lose her magic. And this show is really interesting to me. And I didn't look at the episode before this, but this episode starts right in the middle of the story.
Yes, it does.
Endora shows up and Samantha is trying to do a spell right there. And Endora shows up and Samantha's like, I lost my magic. Dr. Bombay was here. Esmeralda showed up and did some spells to get Dr. Bombay here. And I've lost my magic. I mean, there was no build up to it, which I thought was pretty cool. Because at this point, everybody gets it.
Yeah, exactly.
So Endora immediately is upset because what Dr. Bombay told Samantha is that she lost her powers from living in the mortar world and stifling her magic. Now, they already did a episode earlier this season, or maybe earlier this season with Maurice, and they talked about stifling Adam's magic. So this is kind of we came back to it again.
Right.
And so Endora is furious. Samantha calms her down and she says, because Samantha says, I may live with it. Dr. Bombay pointed out many happy couples live without magic. And Endora goes, well, you might get used to it. Maybe even I can get used to it. But your father will never get used to it. And Samantha's like, oh, my stars.
Oh, my stars.
Needless to say, that just happens to be one of the few times that Maurice actually shows up in the episode. And one of the great lines I absolutely love from this episode is, he is quoting from Hamlet.
As always, yes.
As always, he's very...
King Lear, yes.
He's quoting from Hamlet. He gets out of his car and tells the driver, York, that he can leave. And before York drives away, he coughs. And Maurice says, at last, poor York, he is not well.
That's cute. That's very cute.
I love bad puns, and that one worked for me. Made me laugh a lot.
That's very fun. That's very fun.
So anyway, he shows up. Endora is going to play Endora does a spell on Samantha to make it look like she got her magic back, so Daddy doesn't get upset.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, Darrin walks in and says, "Oh, Samantha got her magic back," and Maurice goes, "What?" Maurice is so angry, he decides to turn Darrin into a leaping lizard. And he raises his hands and points his fingers, and guess what happens, Tony?
Doing, doing.
Yes.
Nothing happens.
That famous "my magic didn't work" spring.
Yes.
And so Daddy lost his powers as well. Dr. Bombay shows up and says he realizes now that Samantha did not lose her powers because she lives with a mortal, that she has the rare disease perimeridicctivitis. And I love Dr. Bombay's diseases that he always comes up with.
That's a great disease.
Very Mary Dictavitis. And I don't even know if he said he'll have to find a cure for it and that nobody should touch her or kiss her.
Ta-da!
And Maurice kissed his daughter when he showed up. So that's why he got it back. Dr. Bombay said, it could be days, it could be years before we find out what happens. Well, it cuts to the next morning. And you think that Maurice is going to be distraught or furious. And Dora is beside herself. She feels so bad for Maurice.
I thought that's so funny. She's so distraught over this.
Yes.
She's so distraught over Maurice's illness, if you will.
Yes, she just is just awful. She has so much pity on him. Samantha is concerned as well. Maurice just kind of marches into the kitchen and says, I did the most remarkable thing. I shaved with a razor. It made my face tingle.
Yes.
And he's like, this is kind of cool.
That's what I love about this episode is he's having a good time. He's having a little adventure.
Yes, he's like, I want to see how the other half works.
Yes. It's wonderful.
He says, I want to see how the other half lives.
It's wonderful. He's having a real adventure with this.
Yes. And so he says to Darrin, I'm going to go with you to work, my young man. And Darrin says, no. And when Darrin says, this wasn't a question, it was a demand. And Darrin says, you have no powers. You can't force anything on me. Mm-hmm. Well, Maurice says, we'll see. And he walks out into the living room. And earlier he had given Endor a sword as part of a joke. And he walks back in with the sword, puts it to Darrin's neck and says, I'm going with you. And Darrin says, okay.
Well, doesn't Dick Sargent just seem to be argumentative for no reason? I don't understand that. Dick York could get frustrated, but there was always a reason. Dick Sargent's just irritated. He reminds me of Valerie Harper in the last 2 seasons of Roya. He's just annoyed by everything. Yeah, take your father-in-law to work. What's the big deal? Why are you so annoyed by this? And you just don't get any. There's no joy in this man. Why is he still in this marriage? There's no joy in this man's performance.
No, and he's not just frustrated. He's bitter, as we said earlier.
He is.
He's just a bitter man.
He's a bitter old queen.
Where I think it worked better with him, because, Uncle Arthur and Darrin kind of had this love-hate relationship. They kind of got along as buddies.
Right.
Just like Aunt Clara got along with Darrin. Of course, Aunt Clara wasn't around at this point. But Darrin and Aunt Clara, he had a love for Aunt Clara, even though she drove him crazy. Mm-hmm. And even in this episode, once Maurice kind of settled down, they got along a little bit. I liked that part of him. I think he was good at that. But he was really bitter. He wasn't a very happy man.
No, he's just not happy at all. That's what I don't understand about him.
So they get to Darrin's office at McMahon and Tate, and Darrin's secretary number 2010 shows up. And Maurice is flirting with her, of course.
Yeah.
And Larry comes in, and they're talking about Benson's chili con carne.
Chili con carne.
Chili con carne, yes. And Maurice has never had chili con carne. And Darrin's saying they're having a problem coming up with a campaign for it. And so he says, maybe I can come up with something. And Darrin says, well, I'll give you a pad and paper and you can come up with something. And Maurice says, I haven't tasted it.
Yeah.
And Darrin says, you don't have to taste the chili to sell it. And Maurice says, that doesn't seem logical. And of course, Larry Tate says, logic has nothing to do with advertising.
Oh, God, such a madman. It reminds me, in hindsight, it's just Mad Men in a sitcom. Yeah.
So while this is going on, Samantha at home, Dr. Bombay shows up. He's wearing a space outfit. I don't remember what he said he was doing, but something crazy again. With another one of his... Actually, this time he said it was an assistant.
Yeah, not his nurse.
He's happy it was an assistant who's a woman.
Mm-hmm.
So he tells Samantha that she needs to go to the apothecary. And Samantha says, well, why don't you or Endora goes? And he says the apothecary says that you need to go.
Yeah.
And so she goes. It's Bernie Kopel. He was in 9 episodes as the apothecary. He's the one that showed up as the doctor on Love Boat. I liked him much better in Bewitched than I did in Love Boat.
He was horny in both of them.
Oh, my Lord. Yes. And he is a really horny old man. Or a horny old warlock, I should say.
So inappropriate to
always
watch.
Chasing Samantha around the table.
Yeah.
So she gets the cure and she goes back home. Now, Maurice tries this chili and loves it. And the client, who's another disgruntled client, isn't happy with Darrin's campaign, which I don't remember what it was. It was awful, just as always.
Just as bad as always.
Well, Maurice's isn't much better. Maurice does one of his great monologues, quoting from Robert Browning when he's talking about how much he loves this chili. And the guy says, "Oh, I love Browning." And Maurice says, "Exactly as I dictated it to him."
That's
like,
funny.
"What?"
That's very funny.
But they quickly move on from that. And Maurice says the campaign is that the man should be in a big home sitting with his butler coming up and something like, "Take away the caviar and bring me Benson's chili con carne."
Chili con carne.
And of course, the client loves it.
Yeah, of course.
And Maurice saves the day again. And in the end, Maurice gets his magic back and all is good.
There's a very tender moment at the end between he and Endora, though. Do you remember that episode?
I do
little
remember,
moment?
but I don't remember the words.
Well,
that's what made me think about it, because it is one of those times when they are cozy.
They're cozy, and he kisses her. And she loses her powers because he hasn't taken the antidote yet. But
that's right.
And so she comes and he kissed me. He hasn't taken the antidote yet. But in the end, he takes the antidote and he is saved just enough for Endora to take it. And so she drinks her part of the antidote and everybody's back to normal again and they go off together somewhere, which is really kind of sweet. I love that ending. I like this episode a lot. You know,
I like it. I think it was a real good display of Maurice.
It was.
I think it was fun. I think it showed the love-hate relationship between everyone, including Darrin.
This was one of those later season episodes that we talked about last time, which I actually really liked. There's a couple episodes in the final season which actually are pretty good. They're not remakes. They are original episodes. And yes, Samantha's always losing her powers because she's around mortals too much and blah, 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 and all this stuff. But it was actually, this one was nice. I really enjoyed this. I liked the fact that Maurice Evans went to work with Darrin, and I thought it was a good episode. It was definitely one of the better ones of the final year. As I feel about my next episode, which is also from season 8, episode 10, number 238 in the series, and it's called Hansel and Gretel in Samantha Land. And it's from November 11th, 1971. And it really is a lot of fun. It's written by Michael Morris and directed by Richard Michaels. And what happens is that Samantha is reading Tabitha and Adam a story from a storybook. And it's Hansel and Gretel. And they're having the Tates over for dinner. So Samantha leaves Tabitha and Adam to finish the story by themselves. And Tabitha pops Hansel and Gretel out of the storybook into reality. And of course, they don't know what the hell is going on. All they know is they're hungry. So Tabitha brings them, she twitches up the leg of lamb that the Stevens were making for them to eat, but they're still hungry. They're ravenous. So Tabitha pops herself into the storybook. And Samantha finds out, and Samantha has to pop herself into the storybook, which is so much fun because now we're in a totally different universe. We're in this storybook and we have to deal with these storybook characters. And what I love about this episode is these storybook characters are hysterical. First of all, you have the Hansel and Gretel witch, who was played by Billy Hayes. Now, I don't know if you know who Billy Hayes was, but did you ever watch as a kid? Did you ever watch a TV show called HR Puff and Stuff?
Yes, I was going to try and cut you off so I could steal your thunder. Billy Hayes was Witchy Poo.
She was Witchy Poo.
I didn't remember it. And when I saw her, I'm like, oh my God, that's Witchy Poo.
She was also in Lidsville. She played in that TV show Lidsville. She's so funny. She's such an ornery witch in this. And she does not like Samantha because Samantha's a real witch.
Wait a minute. Wasn't Charles Nelson Riley in?
He was in Lidsville as well, yeah. He was in Lidsville,
okay.
Yeah.
He was something else.
Billy Hayes actually guest starred in an episode of Tabitha, too, which is kind of weird. Anyway, so Samantha goes looking for Tabitha. Of course, Tabitha is trapped inside the witch's house. She's going to cook her because Hansel and Gretel have disappeared. She doesn't realize that she's in there, so she's sent on her way, and she comes up against Hansel and Gretel's stepmother. So here's another thing that's so funny about it. The actress who plays Hansel and Gretel's stepmother is Bobo Lewis, and basically she's Hansel and Gretel's Jewish stepmother. These actors are like they're doing a Borscht Belt skit. It is so funny. It's out there. It's outrageous, and it's a real fun change of pace episode. You know, at the end, Samantha realizes she's been tricked by the witch. She goes back to the witch and she's like, you know what? You're a storybook witch. I'm a real witch. So you better watch it. And she turns her into a good fairy, which of course the witch hates. So Tabitha gets out. Everybody pops back into the real world. But now they got to find Hansel and Gretel. Hansel and Gretel have escaped. And one of my favorite scenes is Darrin is out looking for Hansel and Gretel, and he comes upon his gay neighbor. Now, I'm just saying it's his gay neighbor because he's in these tight white jeans washing his car, and he's got this handlebar mustache, and does he give Dick Sargent the once over when Dick Sargent walks away. And I'm like, the Stevens have a gay neighbor. It's a lot of fun. It's a very fun episode. I love the fact that, once again, we're in the logic of Bewitched. And you learn that storybook witches have limited powers compared with real witches. But they're still to be feared because storybook witches are real bitches. And that's what happens in this episode. It's a fun episode. It's a really fun episode.
Well, one interesting thing is the witch does tell Tabitha that she's more powerful than she is, because Tabitha does a little thing where
because Tabitha's a little witch.
And because she's a young witch. That's why Tabitha couldn't get away.
That's why Tabitha couldn't get away. Because the storybook witch is more powerful than little Tabitha. But, we didn't talk about Tabitha and Adam. And I think this is a good point to talk about them because Tabitha was played by twins when she was a very little baby. And then once the third season, the actresses who played Tabitha were Erin and Diane Murphy, which I think a lot of people know, who the adorable, blonde, beautiful, beautiful little girls. And then after season 4, it was exclusively played by Erin Murphy.
They weren't looking as alike anymore.
Yes. They didn't, because they were fraternal. They weren't identical. But there was one episode in season 5 where Erin Murphy had the mumps. So Diane had to play Tabitha. And you can immediately tell because they don't look alike at all. It's really funny. So watch that. It's called Samantha Fights City Hall. And Tabitha, who doesn't look much like Tabitha. And Adam was played by twins David Lawrence and Greg Lawrence. Their real last name was Mandel. And they claimed, here's something for you. They claimed in the 90s they were on Vicki Lawrence's talk show. And they claimed in the 90s that their biological father was Tony Curtis.
Oh.
And if you look at these twins, they look like Tony Curtis. It's very funny. I don't know if it's true or not. He never claimed them, but they look like Tony Curtis. So they could be Jamie Lee Curtis's stepbrothers playing playing Adam.
Interesting. I didn't know that. Fun? I'll have to go back. I watched some episodes with them, but I don't remember that at all.
Yes, Adam looks a lot like a little Tony Curtis. So I kind of believe them. But anyway, it's a very fun episode.
If you watch interviews with Erin Murphy, she looks back really fondly on this show.
Yes.
She has nothing but great stories to tell, and she just beams when she talks about it.
Well, she adored Elizabeth Montgomery. I think that's pretty clear. And and what a beautiful girl. What a beautiful woman.
Oh, yeah.
It's a shame that she grew up into Lisa Hartman. I mean, we're not going to talk about Tabitha, the sequel, but she was an adorable little girl, and just a wonderful little actress.
Yes, she was.
And she looked like a mini Elizabeth Montgomery. It's crazy how much she looked like Elizabeth Montgomery.
She really did.
Yes.
She definitely looked like her daughter.
So that's my second episode, but we do have a special mention, ladies and gentlemen. It's important. There's a very special episode about Bewitched that we're going to wrap up with because it's probably one of the most famous. It's from season 7, episode 13, episode 213 in the series, and it's called Sisters at Heart. And it's from December 24th, 1970.
Groundbreaking.
Yes. It was written by William Asher and Barbara Avedon and directed by William Asher. But what you just said, groundbreaking, why is it groundbreaking, Brad?
Because it had to do with racism. And it was actually written by a school of black children.
That's right. The story goes that a teacher at Jefferson High School in Los Angeles had a 10th grade English class. Her name was Marcella Saunders. And her students were struggling with reading and writing, but they were passionate Bewitched fans. I love that they were passionate Bewitched fans. And so she decided to incorporate some of the Bewitched scripts into her lessons. And then she wrote the studio and told them the story of what was happening. And Elizabeth Montgomery and Bill Asher invited the students to the set. They covered their transportation and they watched the filming. And then the students went back to school and developed this story for the series, which addressed racism. In the story, Tabitha is excited about having a new, quote, air quotes, sister to play with. And it's the daughter of one of Darrin's coworkers, Lisa Wilson, and she's Black. And she comes to stay with the Stevens over Christmas while her father and mother are off traveling for work. They have to go meet a client on Christmas Eve. Thank you, Larry Tate. And of course, Darrin's client, through some misunderstanding, comes to the door and Lisa answers the door, and she and Tabitha are pretending to be sisters. They're calling each other sisters. And of course, Lisa says to Darrin's client, his name is Mr. Brockway, that Tabitha's my sister. So the client immediately thinks, oh, Darrin is married to a Black woman. He hasn't met Samantha. Samantha's not there. So it's this kind of misunderstanding. And what happens is that Brockway drops Darrin from his account at McMahon and Tate, and they're not sure why. And Tabitha wants to be a real sister with Lisa, and she's told by some little bitch at the park that they can't be real sisters because they're not the same color. So, of course, Tabitha... So they have matching polka dots. So they are sisters at heart. And that's what Samantha says to them. She says, you don't have to look alike to be sisters. Sisters share more than a mother and a father. They share love. They share good feelings. And it's just a really warm, it's a really wonderful little episode. And it's really warm. And I think it is historic because it addresses racism in a very interesting way. I mean, this was 1970, so All in the Family had not premiered yet. All in the Family was going to premiere the following January, the next month. So it was really brave of Bewitched to tackle this. Plus, what a heartwarming story of how it all came about. Don't you think so?
I do think so. It reminds me of the Sneetches.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a lovely episode. I highly recommend watching it, for the historic aspects of it. It won a special Emmy Award. The Governor's Award at the 23rd Primetime Emmy Awards in 1970. So it's a wonderful episode. It was actually Elizabeth Montgomery's favorite episode ever.
Yeah, it's an awesome episode. Definitely watch it. I want to say a couple things before we go. First, I want to talk about Dick Sargent coming out of the closet. As you said, he came out in 1991 on National Coming Out Day. The first time, I don't know how soon after that this was, the first time I saw Dick Sargent and realized he was gay is he showed up on an episode of Donahue.
Yeah.
And he not only showed up on the episode, he was dressed up in all leather like a Tom of Finland model. An older Tom of Finland model, but he's wearing the whole leather garb. He was in the leather scene. And I think Elizabeth Montgomery was with him. I can't remember for sure. And typical Donahue, Donahue was very gay friendly and very passionate to the LGBTQ community, but sometimes they were a little on display too much. So there were people that were kind of bitter at him. There were people that supported him. But I remember watching that and thinking, because I wasn't out yet. And I was so excited to see that. Just so excited.
It was an incredibly brave thing to do. An
incredibly brave thing to do. And then the next year, the West Hollywood Pride Parade.
Yeah.
Dick Sargent and Elizabeth Montgomery were the Grand Marshals.
Oh, no wonder.
That's just awesome.
No wonder we love Elizabeth Montgomery so much. I mean, think about that. This 1992, she is sitting proudly with her friend Dick Sargent. Now, like I said, I may not be a big fan of Dick Sargent, the actor, but I'm a big fan of Dick Sargent, the person, and the bravery he showed at this very, very difficult time. Don't forget, AIDS was at its height in the early 90s, and there was a lot of hate out there. So
1994 was the highest rate of AIDS cases in the nation.
Right. So, I mean, what bravery this man showed. And what bravery and integrity did Elizabeth Montgomery show standing next to her friend and riding in this parade with him? So, yes, a beautiful kind of ending to that relationship. Unfortunately, Dick Sargent died not long afterwards. But he died of cancer. He did not die of AIDS. Many people said incorrectly he died of AIDS. Not that it matters, but he died in 94 from prostate cancer. I didn't say Pat.
Yeah, and it's interesting why they would think that, because it was 1994 that I just named when there were so many AIDS deaths.
Cancer visited.
But yeah, it was prostate cancer.
Cancer visited the cast of Bewitched quite a bit. Agnes Moorehead died in 1974 of cancer. Not long after Bewitched ended. Bewitched ended in 1972. And she died in 1974. She was one of the many people who worked on the John Wayne film The Conqueror in 1956. And John Wayne also died of cancer. And they also believe that many of the people who died, who were on this film, were exposed to radioactive fallout. So there's a big question about that, about did this cause these people to die? But, you know, when Bewitched ended and it was time for Bewitched to end, the Montgomery-Asher marriage was ending. And so they did have a contract to go to the 10th year, and they stopped at their 8th. They had the power in their contract to say yes or no. First, Elizabeth Montgomery said she would do a 9th season, and then she said, no, I'm not going to do a 9th season. So their production company provided shows to replace Bewitched, which was in their contract, one of which being the Paul Lynde Show, which unfortunately didn't make it. But the marriage had been showing the strains really since the 6th year. So not long after Bewitched ended, they divorced again in 1974. And Elizabeth Montgomery, you know, we always think of Elizabeth Montgomery as Samantha, as a sweet, wonderful person. But I think Elizabeth Montgomery had a lot more of Serena in her than Samantha. I mean, when you think about it, this was a woman who had obviously had very deep and strong passions. All you have to do is look at her post-Bewitched career. I talked a little bit about this in the first episode. The Legend of Lizzie Borden. She gives a chilling performance as Lizzie Borden. In fact, this is kind of weird. After she made The Legend of Lizzie Borden, she insisted everybody call her Lizzie. Oh. She was not Elizabeth anymore. She was Lizzie. And she was allegedly distantly related to Lizzie Borden. She did The Legend of Lizzie Borden, A Case of Rape. These are all Emmy nominations. A Case of Rape, which was a very bold film, a TV film. She kind of became the queen of the TV movie. The Awakening Land. She did a version of Dark Victory. So she was very busy. She was a very busy movie actress, and she made sure that all of her post-Bewitched roles were varied like this. And she married Robert Foxworth in 1993. And unfortunately, she also died of cancer. She died of colon cancer on May 8th, 1995. And we lost a true angel. God called her back, as I believe he does with people who he loves. He's like, it's time for you to be with me because you've been enchanting these people for far too long.
I think that's a good thing to end on.
I think that is too. This was so much fun. So much fun to do this. And thank you, everybody, for indulging us in our Bewitched marathons. Thank you, Brad, for indulging me in this. I don't know that you quite knew what you were taking on when I said, let's celebrate Bewitched, the 60th birthday.
I was excited, but as I said, I didn't know how I was going to pick 4 episodes out of that series that I like. And I'm not going to say I picked my favorite ones. I picked those that I liked really well, that I felt fit the show.
Yeah, I agree with you.
And had characters some of them are my most favorite. So we have some great episodes coming up, and soon we have October. And what's October known for, Tony?
Well, kind of in our Bewitched mode here, we're going to be discussing our favorite Halloween or quote unquote scary movies. Now, I wanted to do Valley of the Dolls, but Brad went, that's not a scary movie. I'm like, well, it is a scary movie, but I get what you're saying.
It's scary in a different way. I'd like to do it sometime, but no, we already have a list.
We do.
Including one that a listener asked us to do.
Yes.
So we'll get to
I'm very excited about that. And, so stay tuned for those episodes coming up. That's all. And
it goes to say these are classics, not Freddy or Jason.
No, classic, scary, quote unquote, movies. So, Brad, I guess there's nothing left to say, but you know what? I don't really want to say it. So let's not say goodbye. Let's just say au revoir.
No, let's say goodbye.
Well,
oh, my stars.